The answer lies in the heart of battle.
It's the battle of the century!
Hello everybody, Focus Felix here, and welcome to a new series. It's called Fighting Games for New Players, FGs for NPs. Over the last couple of years, I've developed this strange obsession with fighting games. As a kid, they weren't really more than, button mashers you played your friends with. Sleepovers, mashing, trying to figure out how I did a fireball before finally getting bored and frustrated and just moving on to something else. And after a couple of years passed, I can't get enough. There is just something about executing your moves perfectly and nailing that combo, or downloading the way your opponent plays and getting into their head. Staying away and just really frustrating them and trying to get them to where they crack and just start doing stupid things that you can punish. There's a really cool player versus player outside of just what your hands are doing, and it's something I find incredibly enjoyable. Now, I know there are plenty of people like me who've only just recently, and when I say recently, even though I've been playing fighting games pretty seriously for a couple of years, a lot of these guys that have been playing fighting games have been doing it for 10, 12, 15 years. A lot of these guys that started in bodegas and in, New York City and a lot of these West Coast venues, just literally been feeding quarters into machines all these years, and they're just excellent the way that they play these games. And a couple of years is still not enough for me to feel confident in the way that I play, but at the same time I still have a lot of information that I'd like to pass on to you guys, because I had a problem with that when I first started out. It was hard to find concise, gathered information when I first started on my fighting game adventure, and so I am bringing all of that work to you guys. So now you get the simplified, nice version of what I think is basic information that you should need to know going into playing a fighting game. So I won't go too in-depth for this video, but before you even pick your character, there are some things you need to understand about fighting games. I'm going to be playing Street Fighter 4 for this video, just because it's not only the OG tournament fighter, it's been around for years, but most vocabulary and systems that you find in other fighting games all kind of started in Street Fighter, and they were just taken and slightly tweaked. You're doing little things like that. Street Fighter is a progenitor of modern tournament fighters, and it's really just the best example of what you're going to need to know when you're going into a fighting game. So let's start out with just what happens when in a game when you pick your character and you pick your stage and screen starts out with your little versus animation. What's going on? Well, fighting games run at 60 frames per second. This means that for each second of time that you're playing, the game is going through 60 frames. You can think of this like a flip book, with each individual page being a frame in the game. So if an attack is 4 frames, imagine that's 4 flip book pages that attack requires. The byproduct of this frame system is that every button you press has some frame data attached to it. That means that every attack that you fire off may require 30 frames to go through its full animation, or it may only take 10 or 12. If I was to throw a light punch right here, that attack is going to have startup frames, it's going to have active frames, and it's going to have recovery frames. In this punch example, your startup frames would be at the point where your fist is cocked back and ready to fly. Still hasn't been fired off yet. It's still just in that startup animation where you're bringing your fist back. The active frames would be the point where you extend your arm, your fist comes out, and it makes contact with your opponent. After that, the recovery frames would be how long it takes before your character is back in its standard resting point and before you can actually press another button to execute another attack. If you notice, if you press a button and then press another button too quickly without allowing your character to recover, it won't come out because you'll be trying to input that during your character's recovery frames. Every button in a fighting game will have startup, active, and recovery frames. Our next few subjects are probably the most important because they're what allow you to actually perform combos. Things like canceling, hit stun, and buffering are vital to actually chaining your buttons and your specials into strings, and these strings are called combos. Canceling is a very literal term. You literally cancel the animation of one attack with another in order to have that second input come out more quickly. An example would be hitting with a standing jab, and then before that animation enters its recovery frames, you will input the buttons for an uppercut. If I'm hitting the punch button and then immediately putting in an uppercut, these will come out in a chain. What I did was I canceled that normal button, that jab, that punch, with a special, this uppercut. This is the most common form of canceling, which is canceling a normal with a special. It's important to note that normals can be canceled in other normals, but this is something a little more in-depth we'll get into when we're talking about learning your character and what your character actually does when you put in directional inputs with their buttons, and what buttons cancel into other buttons, and links, and all that fun stuff that makes Street Fighter the glorious, frustrating thing that it is. Our next stop on the combo journey is hit stun. Hit stun can simply be described as the state a character enters when they're hit. They're flinching, and they're allowing you to hit them again without their character being able to react. Hit stun is another vital component for combos. You need to be able to hit your opponent repeatedly without them being able to do anything about it in order to chain your abilities together. Here, it's also important to note that some attacks have more hit stun than others, and it varies from character to character. The underlying idea behind these two combo mechanics is buffering. Now, in that previous example where we threw out a jab and then uppercutted, what we were doing is, yes, we were performing a cancel, we were canceling that normal attack into the uppercut, but what we were doing is buffering the input for the uppercut during the animation for the jab. Fighting games have this system in place so that you can start putting your next action in while an action is already taking place. All this vocabulary may seem complex, guys, but you'll be doing these things naturally just after a few minutes with the game. Once you sit down and you find out what your normals are and what normals actually cancel into these specials, it's really just all going to come into click. All these, they're long explanations, but they're very simple ideas. Now, these concepts are pretty specific to just performing combos. There are all sorts of different things that go into Street Fighter, especially, that are just the way you actually play the game, not so much as the way the game actually functions. And this is true for every fighting game. The things that I've talked about are present in every single combo that you're going to be performing in every tournament fighter in existence. We will be getting into things like blocking and frame traps and mix-ups, but there's a lot to talk about, and we're just going to have to save that for another day. That's going to do it for me this time, guys. We'll be back with another edition of FGs for MPs, and we'll be delving into learning your characters and the various efficient ways to actually figure out how to play a character without having to do a ton of research, just something you can do on your own. And until then, guys, we'll see you. Thanks.